name's Georgia, and I have been watching a lot of this very interesting YouTuber called Bailey Sarian, and what she does is every Monday she'll do her makeup while also talking about murder mystery. So this gave me an idea, I'm a film student, to do something similar where I'll do like a movie review but more of like cinephile style movie review while doing my makeup. So I've got my notes and my makeup. So the film I want to talk about is Safe by Todd Haynes. It came out in 1995, so it's quite an old film. Obviously it's going to be a spoiler review to an extent. It's really interesting. So the synopsis is it's a Californian suburban housewife played by Julianne Moore. She develops an environmental illness. It's a story of how she's like adapting to her environment when she finds out about, you know, what's making her ill. She eventually goes to seek refuge in like a rehabilitation or like community environment led by a guy called Peter Dunning, and he's an AIDS sufferer, which they talk about in an interview with Todd Haynes, which is quite interesting. I'm using the detoxify. It's very good. Julianne Moore plays a character called Carol, and she's like got a very like plastic suburban life, which I know Todd Haynes has mentioned, like growing up in California and stuff, so it's all very like kind of like the ideal American lifestyle. Her character has kind of like a void personality. A lot of the cinematography is interesting because there's a lot of long shots and stuff like that, so you kind of like disassociate from her. There's a lot to do with Todd Haynes' inspiration from Douglas Sirk, who did All That Heaven Allows, which is quite famous for its use of reflection. And then obviously later on Todd Haynes actually recreated All That Heaven Allows, and he did Far From Heaven, also with Julianne Moore. Again, it was all about reflection and understanding oneself. You see a lot of that in Safe, in the sense that because she doesn't have a personality of her own, she kind of reflects her sense of image in her friends. So at one stage she gets a perm because her best friend had a perm. Or there's a scene where she's sat drinking a glass of milk, which is kind of weird, she's got a thing with milk in it. Really understand. But yeah, so she's drinking a glass of milk, and then she's reflected in the television set in front of her. So she's kind of ornamental. A scene where she's picked out a couch and she complains to the removal men that, oh, this wasn't the colour that I wanted, I didn't want this colour. It seems like that's kind of the only control she has over her life. There's a lot about reflection, even up until the end scene really, where she's looking at herself in the mirror and she finally says, I love you. And at that point she's distanced herself from everyone and everything. It's her way, I suppose, of taking back control. So you start to wonder about what the meanings are behind this film. It's really complex and it's really interesting because it covers kind of a lot of bases. Her ailment as a person, you start to wonder actually, well, has she actually got anything wrong with her? Or is this just something that she's developed psychologically because it gives her a personality, it gives her something unique about herself that actually makes her different? Because, you know, she's spent all this time mimicking her friends and being a good housewife, and you know, she has a very hard time expressing herself. So you kind of wonder, is it completely psychological or not? And then obviously when she gets to the retreat, she starts finding her voice and discovering who she is. So I know also that in an interview Douglas Sirk was mentioned by Todd Haynes for this like false happy ending. Personally, I think I liked the ending of Safe. It suited her personality. She kind of isolated herself from a world that she was really, really scared of. You feel uncomfortable for the whole movie, and then there's this kind of sense of, not necessarily closure, but a sense of, okay, well, she's gotten what she wants, she's got a safe space, it's an igloo and whatever, but is she really happy? It's actually quite a an interesting film because it still holds up today. You know, the environmental illness, it stems from like pollution and things like that. So it's really interesting because, you know, our world now is continuously decaying. It's kind of scary. It makes you aware all of a sudden of what's going in and out of your body without your consent. I think Carol's character is non-consenting to her environment. She's taking back control in the only way she knows how now. It seems like an overreaction, but actually it's unsettlingly close to home. So obviously I do want to mention that film is completely subjective, and there's a lot of elements in this film that different people will relate to. I know that Todd Haynes is a queer director. He also mentions AIDS twice in this film. Once as a kind of like we assume that Carol's best friend's brother dies of AIDS. Again, another fear that was very real, you know, in the 80s and 90s, that people, especially the queer community, didn't really know how to address. So again, that's like another thing. It's something you can look into on a personal note or not. I found that each scene was really cleverly composed in the sense that everything was drawn out and excessive in its space. Directors, I've noticed, tend to avoid what's not filling space in terms of mise en scène. I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on trying to get as much in the frame or try and compose these scenes in terms of object but not in terms of space. Todd Haynes does this a lot in Safe, and you know, you're constantly surrounded by this like void, even like when you're inside somewhere. It's not really until she gets to the community centre, well, you know, the rehabilitation therapy place, that we start to see like more people filling the space. Like there's a scene where she's with her friends and they're all sat together opposite her, but she's completely isolated. And again, that's a disassociation that we feel because we're constantly held back from being close to this character. But I guess it's a sense of being held back from her perspective, being held back from her friends and her family and her husband. And you know, you don't really see much of her child. It's so distanced from everybody and everything until she finally becomes part of a community that she feels connected to. Another really interesting thing was the audio. I read about how one of the creative choices with the audio was that there was like a low hum in the background, like an electrical hum. I think that's something actually that's constantly going on around us that we never really pay attention to because it's always there. You know, you kind of feel like that's just part of it. That's like this really interesting way of world building where you're in touch with the character, so you know what kind of is going on in terms of her emotional state. You don't know her really, so you kind of have to rely on the things around her and the way she acts to kind of get a sense of what she's like, or a sense of closeness. And part of that it is the audio, and having that low level hum to exacerbate almost that fear that she has of her environment. I also think that use of soundscaping is interesting because it's kind of like an underlying threat throughout the whole film. It kind of matches with her bubbling and like rising anxiety about her well-being over something that she has no control over. We don't have an awful lot of control. I mean, you can make choices, you can make choices that are for the betterment of your environment, but ultimately you're not really in control of anything. She's gone from a very clinical, stale environment, her home, the only place she has a real control over, and then even then she feels like she's losing that sense of security, and so she creates a safe room, and then, you know, it's all very clinical, and she tries to take that control herself. As much as there's a sense of space in this film, you also feel really suffocated as things progress. You get the sense that the world is closing in on her, and her fear grows and her anxiety grows, and that sense of suffocation is done a lot through close-ups and like slow zooms into a close-up to see her really like when she's having a panic attack. I think that's a really overwhelming moment to witness. So even when she gets to the retreat, she's struggling because everybody there is quite comfortable with each other. It's very like intimate, which she's not used to necessarily. Like even when the opening scene where she's having sex with her husband, it's not intimate, it's just kind of chore-like. What's interesting about that is that she's then having to adapt to an environment where people are like legitimately intimate and not fickle like her friends around her originally. I mean, that's kind of contradicting what I said before, but like, okay, so her ailments are still affecting her even at the retreat. To a degree, she starts complaining about nearby traffic, and that's when she gets offered the igloo space. You know, she feels like she's lost her sense of control, like she can't seem to get away from the things that are making her so ill. You think that the ailment will be cured and that's the story. That's all the plot is she's got a problem, she's got this debilitating illness, and so you're kind of witnessing her journey as a person, like going through it, discovering it, getting better, but she doesn't actually get better. She goes to this like place where they almost exploit these people with these illnesses by telling them it's their fault that they are the way they are, and that actually are they like I said before, are they treating it like an illness where actually it is their environment. Her life before was just so boring and she didn't really have a purpose, so she developed this illness not only as a way to give her some purpose or some meaning or something to work towards, but also as like a way out. I kind of messed that up, but we move. Aspects of this make you feel like, okay, she's got a really good life, why is she acting up? You know, she's got that kind of perfect suburban lifestyle, she doesn't need anything else. Her going to this place and being told these things and being accepted into this like environment and community, she's getting the same thing just fed to her differently. She's still getting fed, she's still getting looked after, she's still getting what she wants, it's just packaged differently. You know, she doesn't have to work, I don't think she ever did have to work, I can't really remember. You know, her husband did that, and now it's the same again. I think, you know, he's paying for her to be at this place. And going on from like that idea of her having everything she needs is that she doesn't come across as having a mind of her own. Even as she develops this illness, she doesn't really have a mind of her own because she kind of read it in a pamphlet and saw it in an advert. Kind of wonder like what's going on in her head. Does she know how she feels about her lifestyle? Is she acting up because she needs more fulfillment, or is she just, you know, is it a subconscious thing? So my final thoughts are, psychologically as a film, it raises a lot of questions that it doesn't necessarily answer, and it's left to the viewer's kind of imagination as to like whether or not it's all in her head, whether it's a legitimate, obviously we know pollution is like an actual, environmental issue that we're all having to deal with, but why is it affecting her differently kind of thing? Why does it cause her to have this allergy? It also raises the question, is the retreat beneficial in any way, or is it actually like just a load of rubbish, like exploiting ill people for money? Or is she making herself ill? All of those things at once, and you're kind of left in this big questionable mess that you just don't really know the answers to, which is fine because I think raising several different issues it's fine because each person is going to relate to a different thing. I guess it doesn't need an answer because it makes a commentary on so many different things. It's quite a slow burn movie and you don't really get the satisfaction at the end that you might want. But you know, if you're like into long drawn out artsy films with beautiful cinematography by a guy called Alex Nepomniachtchi, I can't say his name, it's Russian, but Google it. Amazing cinematographer for this film. Lighting, colour scheming, everything. It's just really, really beautiful. If anything, you could take that away from it. That is actually just a nice looking film. Julianne Moore's performance is stunning. In an interview with Todd Haynes, again, I think it's just the same, not really long interview, but it's good. I'll link it. But in that interview, he says that he went and visited and interviewed himself some women with environmental illness, with the environmental illness. And he said the way that she struggles to communicate and the way that she struggles with language is like a direct representation of those women, and that a lot of the scripts seem improvised on Julianne Moore's behalf, but actually she followed it to the T. And she had such a beautiful performance in it. It's worth watching it just for her. She's an amazing actor. So it's kind of clear that I'm not very professional and I'm very new to this whole thing. Disclaimer, again, cinema is completely subjective. You will take away from it what you will. My idea of a review is just kind of trying to draw out meaning from what is being presented to you, and that's completely personal. So no one's right or wrong really, unless they're kind of just pulling ideas out of their ass and not really giving it much thought. But what I will say is these might get better, or they might just stay casual. I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I will link you know, the stuff I used, makeup and whatnot, down in the description box below, so if you're interested. Again, my makeup stuff isn't top of the range, but it does the job. If you do want to see more of my face and me talking about movies, obviously I will polish up a bit more next time. It was just a first attempt for me, so that's kind of exciting but also really terrifying. And if you want to tell me what you think, if you guys did watch the movie, that'd be really nice. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. But yeah, thanks for hanging out with me.